Okay, so as you might know, today's session is being recorded. Carly just got that started. We'll share the link to our recording in the follow-up email for everybody who's registered today. So you can look for that following the webinar. We've got just a couple more people trickling in, so we'll give it just another moment here before we jump in. Okay, and while we're waiting, I'll just make a note that you'll notice Coffee and Climate looks a little bit different these last couple months relative to our previous format. We've transitioned to a webinar format to accommodate the growing audience that we have. So while you can't see your fellow attendees, there are quite a number of folks who have joined. We've got 41 participants already this morning. We do now have a Q&A feature. So you can find the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to drop your questions there as they come to mind. We may not be able to get to all of the questions that are in the Q&A tab, but we do have 15 to 20 minutes to address audience questions in the Q&A box. And also if folks want to raise their hand, we can bring you off mute to ask your question at the end of the presentation. And so just please raise your hand and we'll work our magic on our end to loop you in and enable folks to ask questions. Okay, so with that, I think we can get started. I'm going to give an introduction to our guest today. I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker, who is Professor Max Boykoff. Max is a professor in environmental studies at the University of Colorado Boulder and also the executive director of the Buckley Center for Sustainable Education. And we're really lucky to have Max with us today. He's internationally known for his research on climate science and environmental communication. He has written and edited a number of books and many, many articles, including a book on creative climate communications. And Max has really been a leader in this space, bridging the spheres of academic research and real-world implementation of innovative climate communication. And today he'll share his insights and ideas, drawing on several decades on the front lines of climate communication, where he's been implementing a lot of these exciting approaches to more effectively engage the public on the issue of climate change. So without further ado, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Professor Max Boykoff, and I'll turn it over to you, Max.
Thank you very much, Megan. It's an honor to be with you all. It sounds like it's a great tradition of these Friday Coffee and Climate Chats. Happy to be a part of this. Can you see the slides that I just put up?
Yep.
Great. Well, maybe I'll start with a trivia question. I've been to 47 states in this country, and Maine is not one of them. I've never been to Maine. I look forward to going to Maine at some point.
You're gonna have to fix that.
Yeah, and there's two others. So maybe in Q&A I can tell you what the two others are. Okay, and well, really pleased to be with you all. I am going to walk through some of the work that Megan had described that I've been doing for the last years, and then certainly invite questions from you all. I look forward to that discussion portion. I'll keep an eye on the time so that I leave sufficient time for that. So yes, I've been working at these vexing challenges around how to communicate about climate change in ways that can advance conversations, engagement, and action. This has happened in various contexts and spaces, from local communities to even just dinner conversations up to international negotiations. So things from, I'll share with you in a little bit, I've been a contributing author to the most recent United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Assessment Report, and negotiating how to include the research around what is effective, what works, how, when, why, under what circumstances. And then I've also been involved in in some of the climate negotiations over the years. Now I've been to 8 of the UN climate talks that go from place to place. And this upcoming year, they'll be in Antalya, Turkey at the end of the year. In fact, next week is a mid-year meeting that takes place in Bonn, Germany each time. Happy to talk about those more formal spaces. What I'm very interested in is how those formal spaces of climate science and policy find meaning in our everyday lives, how we then negotiate them through our attitudes, our intentions, our beliefs, our perspectives, our behaviors, and then we express ourselves in terms of what our priorities, what our concerns, what our ambitions in these arenas. I may not need to share with you all some of the background here, but I'll put up just a couple short slides nonetheless. Things are not what they used to be. We've been loading the atmosphere with greenhouse gases on the upper left-hand side, as you can see here, CO2 into the atmosphere. I was born into a world where it's 328 parts per million. We're now about 100 parts per million higher than that. We have started a great experiment, great not in yay, great, but great as in a tremendous experiment here that is reverberating throughout our world. CO2, the residence time, the time that it stays in the atmosphere is anywhere from up to 50 to 200 years. So frankly, the emissions from the Model T in the early 1900s are the kinds of emissions that we're still dealing with to a certain extent today. So the actions that we take today have effects going forward into several generations. So that may uh, garner all kinds of thoughts from you all. For me, it generates quite a bit of motivation to turn off the spigot as soon as possible for the benefit of future generations. Going across these, you can see methane, you can see nitrous oxide, you can see uh, those are 3 of the prominent basket of greenhouse gases that get assessed. They're going up still in the atmosphere. This isn't necessarily a science talk, but I'm willing to talk about some of those things if you wish. And then on the bottom, just a couple of indications of ocean heat content. The ocean waters are warming. That has all kinds of effects as well. And Arctic sea ice extent is dropping. And so these are some of the scientific pathways in. And I start with the science deliberately, and I'll come back around as to short explanation of why in a moment. So what I'm really interested in, what I'd like to walk you all through today together, is asking these questions about what kinds of communications work, how, when, why, under what conditions in a 21st century communication environment. I put in here first news-based and then creative. I'd like to walk through those in turn with the time that we have allotted. Start with some news-based considerations and then move to those more creative spaces. As Megan had mentioned, I wrote a more recent book on that topic. So this is this sort of central thread through what I'd like us to walk through today. As I do that, I share with you a couple passages from the IPCC assessment report that I mentioned that I contributed to. So there are 636 authors, contributing authors that are brought on with subject matter expertise to bring in peer-reviewed literature, that which has been vetted tremendously. So I was brought in to talk about the kind of considerations around science into policy, science, policy, culture, and creative communication. And so this is one of the passages that we have in there, include just showing how broad variety of media platforms now contribute to the public conversation around climate change. A few additional key passages include the following: that accurate transference of climate sciences has been undermined significantly by climate change counter movements in both legacy and new social media environments through misinformation. I don't plan to get into this talk too much about it. It is another aspect of work that I do, looking at how initiatives such as Project 2025 out of the Heritage Foundation, I've I've taken a closer look at one of their partner organizations called the Heartland Institute and how they influence these spaces and undermine progress on climate policy action. This can be through misinformation, as it says here, also disinformation, deliberate poor information entering into the public sphere. And then a second quote for you is that at the time of the 2022 report, media shaping public discourse about climate mitigation was prominent, and global media coverage had been growing up to that point. I'll share with you in a little bit, in a few more slides, that it actually has dropped off to near COVID levels of coverage. And so that generates definitely some questions, some conversation, maybe some worries about what that means for our considerations around climate change moving into the policy decision-making sphere. So the passages that are noted here, TS refers to the technical summary, and then 13.4 is the chapter itself. There's a summary for policymakers, then there's the technical summary, which is much larger, and then there are the chapters themselves that feed into all of it together in each of the three working groups. So I want to turn to news-based, if that sounds good. I can see you, Megan, and just wave your hands if you want me to stop at any point. Looking into news-based, and this involves working with your colleague and my colleague, Megan Daly. She's been a part of this project for several years now, and helping us to, on a monthly basis, monitor how and where media have been covering climate change or global warming. We've expanded this now into 14 different languages. This is within under 60 countries and about 130 different news organizations, mainly print media. And Megan, along with other members of our team, every month we go into our data sets and we take a look at what are the numbers, how are the ebbs and flows of climate change or global warming coverage mapping out. And so we do this, and it really is the power of collective action in a way that we cover all of these sources. We then provide the baseline data, the numbers, in an open source agreement that we have with our University of Colorado libraries, where Megan had done her PhD. And we then are able to use that as a foundation to provide for others to run data. In fact, I just talked with the journalist yesterday, and I invited him to run some numbers. I provided some numbers too, and that's part of what we provide. And then also that provides a foundation for us within our team, within our group, to then study how and why these numbers ebb and flow as such. And what is the content within the stories themselves as well. So this is a brief snapshot of media coverage of climate change or global warming, newspaper coverage that I just pulled. We just did this update yesterday and put it up on our website. And as you may see, there are certainly some spikes in time. Given the sort of format of this, I won't quiz you all here. That spike at the end of 2009 was the Copenhagen UN climate negotiations. There had been a tremendous amount of interest going into that, with Barack Obama having just stepped into the White House at that point, and the movement in anticipation of a successor agreement to the Kyoto Protocol generated a lot of media coverage. Just preceding that, for those who have followed this for a while, you may recall an email hacking scandal that took place out of the University of East Anglia in the UK. This was referred to not so affectionately as ClimateGate, and that it also generated attention going into the Copenhagen talks. That has proven to be the largest spike that we've seen as we've been monitoring this now for quite some time. There have been certain increases around the IPCC assessment reports coming out, and we get into the various contours of this. I think I'll just point out one other thing on this slide, which is around spring 2020, you see that tremendous drop off, and that is associated with the coronavirus pandemic and a lot of news attention that was then paid to what was going on there, and it was pulled away from climate change coverage. There is a finite news hole for the most part still within these spaces, and when other news garner attention, it pulls away from climate change coverage. And that may be a part of an explanation as to what's going on now as well. Happy to talk about that some more. So what we also do on top of that is that Megan, the team, and I then provide these numbers, and a subset of us then writes up these monthly reports. This we just published yesterday. It's our 113th. So we've been doing this for a while on a monthly basis, where we then assess along the news story themes that I think you can see at the bottom there, um, along the news story themes of political themes, economic themes and issues that come up, scientific, cultural, and then ecological or meteorological. We can break those down further. Those are what drive coverage. These days, kind of sometimes in a seasonal context, political and economic really drive a lot of coverage, but it gives way to ecological and meteorological with the largest landmass in the northern hemisphere that a lot of the extreme events, extreme heat events that start to crop up in summer gain prominence with connections made to climate change, global warming. So I mentioned previously, we've produced a lot of research. This actually isn't exhaustive, but it's an indication of a lot of the work that we see ourselves as doing as part of the responsibility of this work. Megan's just produced with some other researchers that are associated with this team, a great new study that's come out that Megan, hopefully you'll share at some point, some of that work and some of the insights that you've gained. It's been just a great way for us to have a starting point and then investigate how and why into various areas of climate change in these various places and how they are communicated. I'll leave it at that for now, just because of time. Happy to talk much more about any of that, of course. But I'm going to pivot into creative communications. And for this, I'm going to lean into the example of how we're utilizing comedy as a way to provide space for particularly younger people to communicate about climate change in these times. So again, the same central question, essentially. And with this, I'm going to bring in this notion of how are the dominant ways, scientific ways of knowing and learning. I purposefully started off this talk by talking about the scientific ways of knowing about a changing climate. That is similar to the way in which climate change was introduced into the public sphere, if you will, through the sciences. That at the time, NASA, Goddard Institute for Space Studies, had James Hansen had testified to the US Senate in the summer of 1988 that the global warming had begun and that we needed to stop waffling. We needed to take concerted action. This was in 1988, a committee that was set up by then Senator Al Gore. And it was introduced as a scientific problem, as a pollution issue. And that is what has continued to capture public attention, thinking about this primarily through the sciences. Now, that grabs attention, and I think that's very important. But at the same time, we need to be very careful about this notion, which is captured by Brian Wynn, a science, technology, and society scholar, that we need to be careful about this information deficit model being the pathway forward. If we just stack up all these studies, some of which I've been a part in front of my mother, for example, and say, hey, take some time and read through these, and then you'll know what's the right thing to do. We know in our complicated lives that doesn't work. So the deficit model, this idea that we can just put a bunch of information in front of people and they'll make the right choice, is dead, but it lives on. There's certain ways that the scientific ways of knowing are very important to ongoing understanding, awareness, engagement, action. But we also have to recognize that it is not the only way to go, that merely relying on the science doesn't get us there. It is living on in terms of legitimacy of science, in terms of the important role that it plays in society, providing insights through systematic approaches that we may not be able to see with the naked eye, but we must recognize that we need more. And so if you can see, I don't know if this floating meeting panels covers it up, but at the bottom you can see then a quote from Suzanne Mosier, a prominent social scientist, who says, providing information and filling knowledge gaps is at best necessary, but rarely sufficient to create active behavioral engagement. I would add in sustained behavioral engagement. That is what is needed. So the sciences provide a way in, yet we need much more. So that leads me to the next slide, which is to say we are exploring these expanding pathways. We're looking into experiential ways of knowing, how we observe our everyday lives, how things aren't the way they used to be. We can think about aesthetic ways of knowing through the arts, important ways of tapping into our consciousness in ways that maybe the sciences don't achieve. We can think about emotional ways of knowing, which leads us into some of these pathways, from our hopes and dreams to our worries and woes, that bringing people together, marching, collective action, political protest, maybe some of the more prominent ways of these expanded pathways, young people finding their voice through the movements that have been attributed to Greta Thunberg. And then you even have medical doctors that are staging die-ins outside JP Morgan offices because JP Morgan has invested heavily in fossil fuels. These more creative pathways to express their own concerns and interests. And then we can just settle into the everyday. People magazine talk about celebrities taking action in their various ways. Barbie now has an eco Barbie collection that kids may play with. And so these are just some of the everyday spaces that have expanded these pathways. And at the end of all of this, Rush Holt has an extended comment, but to excerpt just a little bit, facts from the sciences by themselves are voiceless. They get animated through these expanded registers, through visceral ways of knowing as well, and on, that help us better understand that things aren't the way they used to be. And so Megan mentioned the book that I wrote. It gave me an opportunity to really dig into. It's a real privilege to be able to sit down and take long form treatment of what is going on here. And I sought to understand this core question that I've shared with you already. And I was able to integrate lessons from social sciences and humanities research and practices. There are many case studies out there that are immensely valuable. I had the opportunity to see where there are points of connection, what kind of insights we can gain from those various case studies in different times and places. One of the central takeaways from writing up this book was that there is really no silver bullet. That some folks over the years, I think including myself at times, would think, well, gosh, Superstorm Sandy was so impactful on the East Coast in the centers of power. That's really got to be a pivot point in what's been going on. And it's not that it isn't, but it is the other uh, activities that may be going on at the same time across political, economic, cultural um, spaces, scientific spaces that come together. It's the silver buckshot effect, if you will. This has been described maybe a little bit more beautifully as the dandelion effect, that the seeds of the dandelion are ones that can then proliferate. So it's not as though we support the sciences or we don't, we support the arts or we don't. It's supporting all of these different ways of communicating about climate change to create an atmosphere and environment for engagement and action. One of the second points I'll just mention briefly about a takeaway from this book is you might see that climate is in parentheses here. And that was for two central reasons. One is that I wrote this book in a way that the assessment of creative communications across advertising and other spaces can be useful for other related science policy society issues. And then second, really making the essential point that for us to be most effective in work that we do that addresses climate change, we don't always need to lead with climate change explicitly. It creates a little bit of tension between what I shared with you around our work to detect climate change in media coverage and climate change in our creative conversations. Nonetheless, that's the complexity of the world that we're in. And so that's to say that to have effective conversations, say with rural Mainers, could be a conversation about environmental stewardship, could be a conversation about fishing and hunting, could be a conversation about what kind of legacy do you want to leave. That can lead into what become effectively conversations that address climate change as well. But leading with climate change sometimes, particularly in the United States across the political spectrum, left, right, can shut down conversations more than open them up. And if what we're after, it's what I'm after, is to generate further conversations about climate change that lead to engagement and action. I am creatively navigating those spaces and maybe not always leading with climate change. There is a statistic you may be familiar with from colleagues at Yale University, George Mason University, that 64% of people in this country currently rarely or never talk about climate change. And so these are creative ways that that we can hopefully leverage new opportunities to have those discussions, to generate conversation. So to hone in, and I'm looking at the time to make sure we leave enough time for conversation, is that one of the ways I mentioned that I'm doing this with young people is utilizing comedy. This is a partnership through and through with a theater professor named Beth Osnes Stadefall. She and I began this. We're going into our 12th year of experimenting with students. It has been very resonant. It's had a lot of traction, I think, in part because it provides a space where students, where young people can express themselves. It provides a space where maybe they feel a bit more shut off to direct political engagement, access to political leaders. They may be feeling otherwise shut off to ways to move in an economic sense. They can't. Few of them have stocks, portfolios, retirements. Few of them own a home. Few of them can even consider buying a heat pump or putting solar panels on their house because they're renters. And so this is a space where they can grab a hold of some of this public conversation and share their own perspectives. Early on in this experiment, we had partnered with Project Drawdown. Catherine Wilkinson was my first PhD advisee, and she was a senior writer for Project Drawdown, and it gave us an opportunity to then focus in on solutions so that students weren't just merely diagnosing the issues, but um, working on how to point towards solutions and ways to alleviate the negative impacts of climate change. And so as we moved into this, I think it's important for me to at least point out briefly is that comedy can provide relief amid anxiety producing evidence, and it can be this emotional tool for coping, especially as needed with young people nowadays. So we have really examined this. I'll share with you just a little bit on our research about this to overcome difficult, polarized discussions in these entertaining and non-threatening ways. It has the power to lubricate sites of subversion instead of just mere distraction. By subversion, I mean subverting the status quo notion of fossil fuels, of carbon-based industry practices within our society. It can help wiggle into and poke and prod at maybe the incongruencies that we live with, some of the contradictions. And so there's also this notion of involuntary laughter that which is an immediate meter of comedy success or failure. And so we risk trivializing otherwise important issues, but we're always attentive to that because we tread carefully into these spaces of the everyday to use comedy and humor to open up these considerations. And really, if you think about it, comedians in society are some of the sharpest people around. We've worked with young people. We've now been able to hire professional comedians to work in writers' rooms with our students. And it provides this space of what can be called licensed transgression, where you can walk the tightrope, where you can raise these questions about why are things the way they are. And it can then help us reconsider and consider differently our activities and actions within society. I could say certainly a lot more about the power that flows through comedy, but I hope that at least kind of introduces at the outset a little bit of the why we do this work. So we have been experimenting now for several years. Our shows have grown bigger. It's basically structured around a class that Beth and I get to teach together. And then we perform shows with the students. We started out in smaller venues. We've now been researching this with PhD students and with other collaborators about, again, that central set of questions about what works, how, when, why, under what circumstances. In terms of some findings that I hope you can see at the bottom there, is that maybe, as you might suspect, it increases awareness, it increases their feelings of agency, their learning and knowing and problem solving. It increases the ability for us to talk about climate change in non-threatening ways. And then the claims makers and their claims have been shaped by context. We can talk about how these shows are geared towards a primary audience of fellow students, but then also other folks within, in our case, the Boulder community. But how would this play in other communities is yet to be determined. I can talk a bit more about that work that we're doing with Hip Hop Caucus in some frontline communities and other places too. And then it increases accessibility to complex and distant dimensions of climate change and brings it from that distant space to what's going on here and now. So we've been doing shows when we all unfortunately faced the pandemic. We went into the Zoom space. At that time, we were able to generate external funding from a group foundation called Argosy Foundation. We started to hire unemployed comedians at that time. And Chuck Nice, who you might be able to see on the right side, is our lead comedian with whom we've been working since actually before the pandemic, since 2018. He's co-host of Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's really been a key driving force in terms of the legitimacy of working with professional comedians in these spaces. We've now worked with dozens of comedians over time and partnered them with our students in these Zoom rooms and had these live shows. And so at the same time, we've hosted short video competitions that you're all going to be eligible to enter into that take place every spring, and our students become the jury. And so we also give out awards for folks like at the top right, you can see Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr. from Hip Hop Caucus. So we celebrated 10 years just a couple of years ago, pointing out the comedians with whom we've worked over time, centering our students. We then have focused in on the professional comedians that have worked with our students leading up to those shows. And then we also are able to then provide some funding for these professional comedians to perform in the places where they live and then share back those experiences as well. It's been mostly North American comedians, a few in the UK, talking with a few more in continental Europe these days. And I'll point out in the top right there, you might see Saktia Maroof. She's been a partner now for several years. She calls herself the first female stand-up comic. I haven't exactly investigated that, but I take her at her word. She's really creative and great, and it's provided such a valuable set of insights for our students to better understand the cultural component as this plays out globally. So in 2025, just over a year ago, Neil deGrasse Tyson accepted our Excellence in Creative Climate Communications Award. We sponsored these shows in various communities, fast forwarding just a little bit. And then as we started to do this work in partnership with Hip Hop Caucus, we've now had a set of pilots in locations in New Orleans and in Los Angeles. In New Orleans, we worked with young people at the 20th year commemoration of Hurricane Katrina, where we had a workshop where we were working with young people to help them understand how to utilize the power of comedy in communicating about climate change. Then we had a showcase later in the day where they tried out some of their comedy material for an audience. We're building in an evening show too, where there'll be professional comedians performing. We did this again in Los Angeles. As you can see, maybe in the bottom left, the top winner turned out to be the president of the stand-up comedy club at University of Southern California, USC. He just saw some of our promotions and showed up, and he was fantastic. We're doing this again in New York City for New York City Climate Week. If you are able to get down there from where you are, happy to share more information through Megan about work we have planned there. We've been continuing to work with Pro Comics. These are the folks that we worked with in 2026. Happy to talk much more about them and the great work that they do. A little bit on that competition. I welcome you to enter, just to warn you that the competition can be a little bit stiff. That we received this year 56 submissions from 25 countries. And the first place winner did turn out to be this group called Yellow Dot Studios. That is a studio that was started by Adam McKay. He had done the work around the film Don't Look Up. He was the director of that film, if you're familiar with that. So maybe they had a little bit of an edge with the professionalization, but nonetheless, the students voted them the winners. I'm not going to play this video, but you can see it. There are definitely different ways to treat it. This was the characterization of a gym teacher at a high school and addressing climate change in a humorous way. This year, we had another good show, over 500 people in the Boulder Theater. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson accepted our Excellence in Creative Climate Communications Award. And then we had a video shorts film festival to follow. And then I'm just fast forwarding a little bit, if you'll forgive me in the interest of time, that just last week I brought one of the sketch comedy acts to the Hollywood Climate Summit, that they were selected from our group to go. They performed on stage at the historic Ebel Theater. It was a great packed out crowd, and it really provided another platform for these four students in particular to be able to express themselves. And it's a way that we connected up student work that's going on at this university with the wider entertainment industry, hopefully providing jobs for each of the four of them, but then also just a way for them to then get exposed to these creative spaces and hopefully feel inspired as they go forward. So this is some of the work that we've been up to. I think in closing, I want to say that from that book, I didn't just wrap it up and say, yep, things are complicated. I tried to provide a little bit of guidance. And so you can see on the left-hand side here, 5 tenets of this, that authenticity is tremendously important of understanding who you are and what you bring. Awareness is tremendously important in terms of understanding your audience. And then accuracy is of immense importance. That, for instance, comedians with whom we're now working, we're providing some support through our students, through ourselves, just to make sure that the material that they're using around comedy and climate change is accurate material. And then adding in being imaginative, stepping outside of the box, if you will, of solution sets and being very imaginative about the world that we want. And then lastly, being bold, stepping into these spaces and committing to it. And these are the tenets that carry us forward. The first three, Stephen Schneider, who I don't know if some of you may know, a longtime scientist, was a mentor of mine, great communicator. He used the adage of know thyself, know thy audience, and know thy stuff. And that kind of captures those first three together. And so we layer on the creative elements through imagination and boldness. Then, in terms of other findings from the social sciences and humanities scholarship, is just working to find common ground. There's always a time and place to name, shame, blame, of course. There's plenty of that to go around. But for some of these engagements that we're talking about, it is often about trying to find that common ground together. Emphasizing here and now, I think that's been happening more and more since I wrote this book, that it's less about what's going to happen in the distant future and more about what's happening right now. Third, focusing in on benefits of engagement. By addressing climate change, by moving towards a decarbonized world, we have all kinds of benefits in terms of cleaner air, water, just a more pleasant lifestyle, really. And so focusing in on that can make that shift much more appealing. Creatively empowering people, or in other words, creating those spaces for people to empower themselves, is a lot of those are ingredients for success as well. I hope that our work that I've shared with you around comedy and young people is one example of that. There are many different ways in your community where you can create those spaces where young people and people of all ages can empower themselves to talk about their concerns, their ambitions as it relates to climate change. And then the last piece is just moving from maybe what can be seen as a 20th century model of communication about dumbing it down for the general public, throwing all that science at people, just dumb it down and then they'll get it. It's about smartening up. It's about integrating all these lessons learned into the ways in which we are thoughtfully communicating with one another, having conversations. And so I share this with you to also, you'll see those photos up above. With young people, we've continued to experiment with advertising, and we've focused in more recently on sustainable fashion. And so we've partnered here with the city of Boulder, where we have interior bus ads, 26 of them from our students that are circulating around Boulder right now. And then they selected 5 that we're going to be similarly getting up on the outside of buses soon and moving through our city for 3 months. That's another way that potentially you all can engage in these spaces and hopefully generate conversations through bus advertisements circulating through the city of Portland. So conclusions for the moment. 2 questions I pose here. Do the responses meet the scale of the challenges? And can we create better futures? I think the answers, for me at least, are no and emphatically yes. And that's what motivates me to continue with this work. And it's what brings me here with you all today. And as I've spoken up to leaving about 15 minutes for a conversation, I thank you very much for this opportunity to share some of this work with you and then to um, welcome our conversation together. So thank you. And I'll pass back to you, Megan.
Great. Thank you so much, Max, for this really wonderful overview and highlighting some of this really exciting work that you're doing around comedy in various locations throughout North America and now expanding to Europe. I do see we've got a few questions in our Q&A, and I don't see any hands up. Do you see any hands, Carly? No, not yet. So maybe we'll jump into one of the questions in the Q&A. We have, well, Max, you might know the answer to this. Complete this joke. 3 climate scientists walk into a bar. Do you know?
That's good. I don't know what they're fishing for, but there's possibly many, many
Endless
ways to finish
opportunities.
that. Yeah, I like
So
it. I like it.
food for thought if anybody comes up with a great response to finish that joke, drop it in the Q&A. We have a question from Molly Shen. Do you have any examples of the comedy? Are students doing the stand-up themselves? What does that actually look like in practice?
Excellent question. And I'm happy to respond to that because I hopefully have a sufficient answer. I'll put in the chat. We've been capturing and then posting each of our shows on our YouTube Climate Comedy channel. And so if there's a way for me to just put in a chat, I don't know if I see a chat. I can share it.
There's not a chat option, but if you share it with us, we can send it in the follow-up, or you can do it as if you see the Q&A, you can type it in an answer.
Okay, let me see.
Yeah.
Type in answer. Now I'll just put it. Oops. Let me fish it out without taking too much of our time here. But we've been posting up probably our last 4 or 5 shows here at this website. And so I welcome you to go take a look. It it varies. So to your question too, did that work out? Did it post up there? It sort of disappeared on me. Maybe it's under answered. Okay, yep.
Yeah, and we'll grab that as well, Max. And we always send up a follow-up email with the recording of this talk, and we'll make sure we include those any links that you share as well, so people have easy access to those afterward.
Yeah, but
Great.
people can you can see it under the answered section. But yeah, we will also send it out. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, to your question, we had 5 students do stand-up. We had 4 sketch comedy groups, ranging in numbers from 3 to 5 people in each. And then we also have funds to bring in 3 professional comedians to kind of help structure out the evening. So as you may, if you choose to watch the shows, you'll see we have a musician who's a former student who's fantastic and he kind of plays alongside. And then we have the awards. We talk about the videos. Beth Osnes, State of Falk, and I still MC it a little bit. And then that structures out a show that's about 90 minutes long and it's free. So people hopefully come in with a disposition of intrigue rather than expectation. But I think we have really good content. Just one example, very briefly, of the sketches is that 5 women did a sketch around AI usage now, which is a big set of considerations with young people, with everybody. And they called it AIA, which is AI Anonymous. And they embodied the role of different chatbots or different platforms and talked about their energy use, talked about how humans were interfacing with them and their own concerns. And I think it was a really clever way for them to be able to voice their perspectives in these areas as it relates to climate change, water use, energy, and on.
Yeah, and these are such great illustrations, Max, and we'll definitely share those links. And I just want to emphasize, this most recent event, the 2026 Stand Up for Climate, Max, you had hundreds of attendees. Is that right? Yeah.
We have
So this is
560.
really gaining steam. And I was the governor there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Governor Jared Polis introduced our headliner Chuck Nice, who I mentioned. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is garnering a lot of attention here. It's become a very popular event.
Great.
There's
Okay.
a decent amount of questions in the chat. Megan, if you want me to go and ask some of
Yeah,
them.
go for it.
Yeah,
Thanks, Carly.
so one of the questions, I'm also really curious to know this, is do you have any recommendations for other media or content that covers climate comedy outside of this work? Like any sort of creatives that you regularly follow, their work in this field? You recommend us
Um,
checking out?
Absolutely. Sheesh. At the risk of privileging a few and excluding others, I will say Raleigh Williams has a YouTube channel called Climate Town, and I think everybody should at least give one of his videos a try. Super clever. We worked with Raleigh over time. So Climate Town is one. I'd
Hmm.
say Star Talk is a second. They take on a variety of topics, but Chuck is his sort of comedy sidekick with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil deGrasse Tyson's funny too, but it just is a way that adds a little bit of levity to the work that they do. So that's a second one. I would say follow the work of Stuart Goldsmith. He's in the UK, and I think he's really emerging as a really creative person. We had him to Boulder in February, and I'd say I'm going to give you two more at the risk of excluding people. But Rashida Crockett, she's out of Los Angeles. She's got this project called Might Could, and she kind of does like a bit of a Daily Show type approach to it. She has this set of Might Could videos, and she's currently working on a bunch more. And I think they're really great at bringing forward climate change from um, that vantage point. And then the last one, see, I can give you all kinds of examples. The last one is going to be Esteban Gast, and he sits in a sauna. It's produced by Yellow Dot Studios, and he sits in a sauna with a, kind of celebrity of maybe not A-list celebrity, but then they sit and they heat up and they talk about climate change as they're getting hotter and hotter.
Oh
And
my
it's
God, I
just
love that.
yeah, it's just really funny. I can't remember what the name of it is, but if you look up Esteban Gast and sauna, and you'll find it. So there's five.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I will look those up and attach them in the follow-up email for everyone too.
Great.
So I think
Um,
that your answer to that question also, Alethea Caridi was asking about, the different comics and, whether they might be, um, available for campus visits. So I think you might have given
Uh-huh.
her some good leads on that. And I think Alethea, she might be able to follow up with you directly to find out how you get these comics to campus to engage students. Alethea works at University of New England. I see a great
Perfect.
question from Liv Lenfesty around greenwashing. So, how do you track and call out greenwashing? So, she was thinking of the example of the Barbie. So what's the line between creative climate communication versus marketing schemes? How do we draw the line on that?
Great
I'm
question.
glad. I'm glad she's raised it. Yes, there it could be an argument made that Eco Barbie is maybe a greenwashing strategy, and I wouldn't deny that. Um, I think that comedy in and of itself provides us an opportunity to call out greenwashing. There's certainly been a lot of work through the short videos that have been submitted that call out greenwashing. Some of the work of our own students has addressed greenwashing as an issue. And so comedy provides a space for us to be able to call it out. But then there's a very serious treatment of greenwashing in society that needs much more attention. I just at the maybe promoting one of my own current PhD advisees, Anna Kulikova. She's actually working on her PhD that draws out various aspects, not just of greenwashing, but there's all kinds of other terms that are associated with different dimensions, kind of different contours of greenwashing. Um, and so I think there's so much more that needs to be done. And to the extent that our work uh, is a bit of merely an emotional salve, just itself being greenwashing for the the circumstances that must be changed, we should be called out too. And so we're subject to that all the time. And so Appreciate the question, and I think it's a live set of considerations that we all need to be alert to.
Great. Do you want to grab one, Carly?
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's so many. Let's see here. Let me find. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, in terms of like print media, like postcards or flyers or stickers to educate about a campaign, what have you found works best regarding that sort of, yeah, print content that is creative and engaging?
Um, Print
Or maybe,
content is, yeah, I think maybe to the silver buckshot idea is that there is no really one way that um, that does it best. So lots of different ways, lots of different strategies. That said, we did study our advertising work and we put QR codes on all of the materials that were circulating through the Boulder area for about 3 months. We did two waves of them. We have a paper that came out that is open access that I could provide a link for. And we did find that we declared a climate emergency in the area, and that garnered attention. There was a lot more click through with that kind of a thing. Whether that's good or
mm,
bad is sort of up for discussion. We also used a lot of different imagery around sustainable fashion that hadn't quite caught on as much as some of the other messaging that we were doing. So we're still toying with it. Um, gosh, there's been work in this area for a long time. If you think about the mischievous yes men who had done work that you're not quite what you're asking about with stickers and print materials,
mhm.
but there's so much space for creative work to engage people. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we might have time for one or two more. I feel like this is kind of a deeper question. Just kind of thinking culturally, Rick Peterson notes that Gus Speth has a quote that he thought 30 years of good science could address environmental problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. So, to what degree have you found this angle on climate change as a symptom of much deeper spiritual and moral problems being communicated in the news and creative communication spheres?
Great statement and question.
Great question.
I'm not looking at those directly, so I'm just listening to your relaying of them. That's really good. It's deep. I would say I'm working with young people a lot now, working with college age students, and that taps into a lot of their kind of angst and worry. There is a strong movement. I don't want to overinterpret from Boulder, Colorado, but there is a strong movement to reduce consumption. To sustainable fashion is one way because it's one way that they can control. To think about the food on their plate is another way. And I think what you've described taps into some real fundamental issues that young people are working through. You think about if you've had the opportunity to go to university, you then are on your own and you get to explore those yourself. So when we've been working with these young people, we've been able to really dig into those purposefully, meaningfully, and productively. And so one of the things I think I want to say though is that we can work effectively with our students here, but what we're really after is the scaling notion. So when you mention how can you get a comedian to the University of New England, we want to be able to help you. We've worked with a whole bunch of folks out of New York, for instance, and it's about scaling. And that's what motivates me to have this conversation with you all, because I hope some of it inspires you to dig in your various ways. And however I can provide info and support is great, because we need to foster those conversations about those fundamental cultural dimensions of all of this at scale and together. This is a collective action problem.
Great. Well, we might have time for just one final quick question. Grayson Whitbrod asks, do you find that the presentation of material as specifically quote unquote climate related instead of just comedy impacts the audience interest or comic selection? What would it take for climate urgency to become more pervasive in comedy at large, not just the comics that you're working with, for example?
Thank you. If I understand the question, that helps me explain a little bit more too, is that some of the work that we've done, the work that we do here in Boulder is billed as a climate comedy show. But then some of the work that we've supported in other places is not necessarily billed as a climate comedy show. In fact, Chuck Nice in New York has been playing with the concept of just throwing a comedy show. And then if you've gone to comedy in New York, like Greenwich Village, Lower East Side and stuff, a lot of people just show up at comedy shows. And so Chuck is really playing with that. And then they get in there and like 75% of them don't know that it's a comedy show with climate change material. And so it's a way to grab onto new audiences. And then he's been working to see how they respond to it. And so the comedians that we've hired now, the dozen or couple dozen that I put up at this point, some of them have been in the sciences. There's a Washington Post journalist, an Associated Press reporter, somebody who's worked at NASA. But then there's also people who are coming at this with very low understanding relatively about the science of climate change. And so that's where we've been supporting them. And so they're coming at it from different interests, and that's been really great because then we can better understand how to reach people that may not be seeking out climate change content through comedy. And then we can start to work with comedians who may not already be within these circles of climate change literacy. So hopefully that helps answer that question, that we're trying to spread things out. And those are a couple pathways that we're doing it.
Yeah, well, I see in the comments there are a few folks who are noting they're excited to explore what this might look like in Maine. So we really appreciate you coming and spending this hour with us, Max. I think it's really inspiring. I think, these new ideas are what we need to try to keep pushing forward, creating positive change. And so we just really appreciate you being here with us today. So with that, I think we'll sign off, and everybody can look for the recording of this webinar with some links in the coming days.
And let me just say thank you so much, Megan, for inviting me. It's always great to get a chance to work with you. You've been a superstar. And so really happy to have this conversation with y'all.
Thanks so much, Max. Have a great weekend, everybody.